is explicitly irrational and non-conceptual. For example, moving your body, you can move your hands, you don't have to think about it, just do it. You can't say how you do it. It's an inconceivable thing, and yet effortlessly you can move your hands. You can walk. Even speaking, how does one speak? I mean, how do you make your vocal cords vibrate and produce this elaborate, detailed oscillations of sound? There's no way you can describe that or think of it, and yet effortlessly you can do that, you can participate in that. So and virtually all of our functioning actually is very similar to that. So we're actually very familiar with this kind of irrational, direct experiential engagement. But again, typically we don't especially acknowledge it. And thus we're trying to make a point of it one way or the other descriptively. So noticing that can be very interesting. I mean, a very good, noticing technique is just move your hands and watch that and say, what's happening here? How does that happen? What is it that's happening? And things like this can be a very fruitful exploration. Because right away, you drop out of a rational reference, because there's no way. Even if you say, "Oh, I feel myself, thinking of moving my hands," but that's absurd, because in actual fact, the thing itself is so explicitly non-conceptual. And so again, we're always doing this sort of engagement, but typically we undervalue it, or we don't think of it as having any particular importance, simply because of our bias towards these narrations and these stories and semantic orientation that is so dominant in normal human relations.
Well, talking about looking at the hand movement, that I felt is so strange. Throughout the day, extensively I'm looking at my hand movement, and it's completely, it's indescribable. And there's no sense of ownership of like what I used to think. It's my hand and I'm directing my hand move, but it's completely different. It's quite strange.
Yeah, if you look at it, the hand is there, the movement is there, but leaving aside for a moment what there means or here means, and just it has no context other than itself. It has no context of ownership or participation. It's just and yet it's intensely participatory. But if you look very closely at that, you can't say exactly what that is or exactly how that happens. I'm definitely moving my hands, but having said that, what am I referring to? And it's very peculiar. It's very strange.
It's just like a miracle happening.
Yeah, sure.
It's like getting out of bed in the morning. I often, one moment I'm lying there awake and I want to go today, and then there's another moment when I sit up and I get out of bed, and I haven't said, okay, now you're going to get out of bed. It's just something decided. I suppose you could say it's whatever it's called, the unconscious or whatever, but it isn't it. But it is a miracle for me.
But saying the unconscious is giving a designation to an unknown.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, what's the unconscious? You're hypothesizing there's something called the unconscious. It's meaningful, but it's gibberish. It's just hot air.
It's just a name to explain.
That's a name to explain the unknown. there's no reason to suppose there's lots of unknowns, because the bedrock of everything is fundamentally unknown in the sense of unknowable as unresolvable, undefinable. It's not unknown as in nothing,
No.
or as in a simple darkness, but it's unknown as in the sense of beyond, knowability in human terms. But it's absolutely knowable experientially, because experience is not a human phenomenon, or let's say within the normal categories of humanness. Experience is existential. Experience is existent.
What do you think about, this is completely off track, just what are your thoughts about intelligent design?
About what?
Intelligent design, the folks that,
Intelligent design?
yeah.
I wish there was more of it.
What intelligence was. I was thinking about how we sort of do things unknowably, like I was just looking, and then you look at animals and how they instinctively know the right kind of movement. A lion knows how to go chase its prey, and a tree knows how to be a tree. And that's what I started thinking about, folks that those intelligent design to explain. I think that's what they're doing.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by intelligent design per se, but all intelligence is an exercise of something that's beyond intelligence. In other words, intelligent functioning doesn't happen because one intelligently decided for it to be there. It emerges mysteriously, as all actuality emerges mysteriously. I mean, how can you think? How can you imagine? How can you function with skillful mentality? How can that happen? It just appears. It's not happening because you're doing it through some kind of you're pushing out thoughts and pushing out logic. It's just there. And of course, virtually everything, virtually all actuality is precisely like that. I mean, your entire field of experience just springs into existence in the moment, fully formed in all its detail. Where's it come from? What's doing it?
I left today and I was thinking about when you were talking about practice, and I wasn't really sure what you were saying. And so the question I have for you, what came up for me was, it's like if I was an actress on stage acting out a certain part, and I wouldn't be attached to it. Say I broke my leg in the middle of it, that wasn't in the script, but that showed up too. So when you were speaking of really practicing watching the reality, would that be the same thing as really watching this whole script, no matter what shows up in it, it's still the reality in the moment?
Of course.
Pardon?
Of course, yeah.
So that's how you practice, and really almost pretending that, well, not pretending, we are actors and actresses, but really watching everything and allowing.
Well, watch how you're watching. How can you watch this? How can you see this?
Right.
So it's not just a simple, now I'm observing my experience,
Right.
or I'm observing what's happening. It's more the wonder of what is perception, what is the presence of experiential qualities. And again, not asking the question as if you expect an answer, but just to engage with it with a sense of discovery, just an invitation to discover it, open-endedly. Just, what is this? How is this happening?
So always be curious
Yes,
moment to
it's
moment, no matter what's showing up.
open, intelligent engagement.
And does that be the curiosity? Does that bring you in to the reality of really seeing? Because you're curious, you're not
Well,
stuck in the.
No, you're always really seeing. But not, there's no such thing as unreally seeing.
Well, how do we get blinded in the play then, if we're not really seeing? I don't quite get that. You know, we take it all very seriously.
We confuse ourselves.
If what?
We become confused by our beliefs, which is basically interpretive frameworks. A framework of interpretation is directed in your imagination. Basically, a description of what you think is going on in open terms, in inclusive terms. I'm a human being and I'm alive and this is my life and it's a Saturday and I'm in a spiritual talk and I'm having a discussion and blah, 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 whatever. Anything you could possibly conceivably say or think about it is implicit in that conceptual overview, in that interpretive framework. And it exists only in imagination. It's not true. It's intrinsically inaccurate. If for no other reason than because it's utterly incomplete. There's no way you can include every aspect of everything that is present, that is happening, and the way it is done.
So is that where the innocence comes in? When you're not trying to grab hold and solve it, and know it, and not know it, you just stay in the pure kind of innocence of it?
Well, it is innocent.
Yeah, I guess
In the
that's
sense that it is
it
purely
innocent.
what it is. It is
Yeah,
purely,
innocent.
it is purely itself.
Right, right. And by just observing it, it stays in the innocence rather than.
Well, it always stays in the innocent. You just let yourself notice that is the case.
Oh, okay, I get that. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Because it's not all this isn't appearing as a result of some contrivance.
Right.
It's not appearing as a result of some artifice or some manipulation. It's
Right.
genuinely just bang, poof, here it is.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely pure, absolutely innocent.
That's the moment to moment to moment.
Of course. And there's nothing else.
Yeah.
Even our confusion and even our interpretations are actually that.
Thank you, I really get that. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And it's not like you need to stop the interpretation, just see that the interpretation is that too, and then it becomes a moot point.
And it all melts back into innocence again.
Yeah, it never left innocent. It's made of
Never
innocence.
left it, yeah. Oh,
When you're making things of innocence, it can't become something else.
perfect. Thank you, that was perfect, yeah. That was really perfect. I mean, I really got it. Thank
I
you
see
so
that. That's
much,
good.
Peter. Yeah, wow. Yeah,
It's actually very easy to see.
yeah.
It's blatantly obvious, really.
It's too obvious to see it till this moment, yeah. Huh. Wow.
As humans, we're used to drawing all sorts of categories, and we think there's an actual difference between those categories. You know, objective reality, and then subjective thoughts, and all these different layers and hierarchies, and we imagine they're all somehow separate from each other and have some relationship to each other. But actually, they're all a continuum. They're all the same thing. Nothing ever departs from just direct experience. Even all our convolutions and neuroses and mental activity never consists of nothing whatsoever than instantaneous, spontaneous event. And so when you see that, all of our convolutions partake of the directness and the purity and the innocence of just instantaneous reality itself.
So I'm not sure how to exactly phrase this. I'll probably bumble around. But you may or may not recall previous talks. I lamented about how I don't seem to really notice things. Everything just kind of seems like labeled a treat. And just after this talk and going for a walk, there was something that was able to take in this field and really see things more alive, I guess is the best way. I mean, it's always there, but I just had this sense of I don't know how to say it, but there was more vibrance. I guess it's the best thing.
Well, that's good. It's good to notice that, but it's also important to notice that when it's not like that, that's that too. In other words, when you don't think you're noticing, it doesn't seem vibrant. That is actually the same condition.
Mm-hmm.
Dullness is a type of spontaneous presence, just like clarity is a type of spontaneous presence, and they have no difference whatsoever, except in perhaps their superficial flavor.
So no lamenting no matter what.
Exactly, no lamenting no matter what. But see the truth of it. See the truth of it.
That's remarkable.
When you're not seeing, that's a type of seeing. And when you are seeing, that's a type of seeing. There's no difference whatsoever between them. But see the way in which that's so.
See the way that it's so.
Yeah, you have to experience, you have to see for yourself the way that is true. Otherwise, it's not powerful. You know, I mean, a very simple way to put it is experience is always experience. Whether it's dullness or sharpness or openness or tunnel vision, it's still experience. So it's always the same thing. Just varieties of the same thing. There's absolutely no limit to the range of ways in which this actuality can seem to present itself. But it never becomes anything other than exactly what it is all the time. It never deviates one iota from what it is. It never becomes more itself. It never becomes less itself. And this is directly perceivable. This is knowable. This isn't an abstraction or a philosophical notion.
So I don't want to go down a bunny hole, but it's not about the perceiver.
There is no perceiver. Perceiver is an abstraction. There's perceiving, and you can suppose there's a perceiver and suppose there's a perceived, but the only evidence for that is the perceiving. And perceiving is always just that, but regardless of what flavor it seems to have, or what qualities it seems to have. It's never more or less or greater or lesser.
So it's the mind is just creating these distinctions.
Yeah, the mind revels in classifications, but in classifying it, these classifications are approximations. They're averages. They are not precise. And if they try to be precise, they fail utterly because one looks at these conditions and discovers they're beyond description. So here you're awake, theoretically, and then later on you'll find yourself going to sleep, and then you'll be asleep. When you're asleep, you're experiencing exactly the same as you are now. It has a completely different, perhaps, texture and sort of ambiance or what have you, whatever qualities you want to try and analyze it in terms of. But it's exactly the same thing. Nothing has changed one iota. it just presents with a whole different implication. And then you start dreaming, same thing, nothing has changed. And you wake up, same thing, nothing changes. It's always exactly experience. Experience can look like the waking state, it can look like the sleep state, it can look like the dream state, it can look like, say, deep unconsciousness in the case of, say, general anesthesia or something. It can look like the after-death state, as we'll all find out. But what it is never deviates from exactly what it is.
And exactly what it is the same for everything.
Yeah, can't be said. Yeah, I mean, I call it radiant presence. You can call it what you like. Call it the Atman. You know, there's all sorts of terminology floating around with its respective implications, and you're free to play with any of it. But what it's talking about is simply this present actuality of your experience.
What is it about Dzogchen that appeals to you? And why?
Dzogchen is an excellent spiritual framework for a bunch of reasons. Dzogchen and Kashmir Shaivism are both very similar, and I like them both. They are sort of spiritual frameworks, and in that extent, they're tainted by their own structurality. But they're both very directly and very comprehensively attempting to refer to this actuality. Dzogchen emphasizes its intrinsic purity. It emphasizes its intrinsic inclusiveness. Everything is the absolute state. And especially Dzogchen emphasizes the creative nature of what this is. A lot of traditions imply a subtle duality between the absolute condition and some condition of illusion or delusion, or where there's the implication, even if they state that they're the same, there's still some kind of implication that there's some pure absolute condition and then some condition of, of delusion or what have you. In Dzogchen and Kashmir Shaivism, they point out that these conditions of apparent delusion are in fact nothing other than the pure state. There is no division whatsoever, there's no demarcation whatsoever, which is my observation.
We don't find this in other writings.
Not so much.
Not
It
as
depends.
pure.
It depends. I mean, there's scads of different spiritual philosophies and such, and they all have various implications and so on. But these two are particularly comprehensive and direct in my experience. I haven't it's not like I've researched everything there is, but these two are particularly good. Once you get through their respective symbologies and terminologies and so on and so forth, which is a constant in the equation, you always have to kind of grapple with that stuff.
It does let us have the hook, doesn't it?
Yes.
What you're
There's
talking
no
about,
hook.
because,
There's no hook and there's no you, so yeah, you're off
you don't have to feel guilty about watching TV.
Of course not.
Being a real.
You would be responsible for your nature if you made your nature. You did not make your nature, and there's no you to make your nature, and you cannot find anything that made your nature. Your nature spontaneously appears in a miraculous way, in the same sense that everything spontaneously appears in a miraculous way. And you can't find anyone to complain to. There's no complaint to point. There's nothing to point the finger at.
still feel guilty though. I mean,
You're free to feel guilty, absolutely. You have spark fun. Have at it, have fun. Enjoy yourself. It feels so good to feel bad.
Many of us come from different disciplines, you know, where there's a certain practice and you know, in order to sort of progress in that discipline, you're supposed to do X, Y, Z.
Sure.
And you can go home and say, oh, I just didn't even meditate once this week, or I didn't pray 10 times, or whatever. This is, as I say, we're completely off the hook.
You are, but the important point is, do the math, look for yourself and see very precisely the way that is so. I mean, as a notion, as a philosophy, it's wonderful, but it's much more than that. It's an actual discoverable condition.
And yes, because it sort of suits me. I like the experiencing part of it. And so that's something that's not onerous. It's not a burden to be. It's something that brings often immediate rewards.
Absolutely.
Notice and experience.
Absolutely. It's fun, it's interesting, it can be entertaining, and it's extremely efficient and very powerful. It's what meditation wishes it was. It's what skillful meditation is, and what all meditation wishes it was.
Yeah, and every experience, because I recently had people where I broke my wrist and, oh, look at the rain that's coming down. Isn't it beautiful? Oh, it's, I'm sorry you asked to hear, Peter, because totally speaking of changing, it's been sunny and then it's
That's okay, this is changing too. And it's also beautiful.
Yeah, it was real sunny about half an hour.
What happened? Dude.
Back to what I was saying, in times like, you know, when you have this, I break my wrist and I have to get home with my dogs, and my dog looks kind of funny with pain, and I'm thinking I'm going to faint. It's that experience, as long as it's not totally, you know, a pain I can't even tolerate. But that's interesting too, because there's so much stuff going on in that moment, you know, there's emotions, the things. I get home, what my dog's doing, what's my hand doing, you know, and if you can get away from thinking too much about it and just stay with all of that's happening when something like that, and suddenly immediate like that, you've been just doing along, you know, oblivious, and then suddenly you're totally present because you've done something kind of drastic to the body. So, you know, I mean, so the experiencing is also, as you said, it's interesting in times when it's not like looking at the beautiful rain or the.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm wondering about it, kind of.
Yeah,
I mean, how the hell it has happened.
Pain is a very, very interesting experience. Pain is a very fruitful area of investigation, or any kind of discomfort. You know, the trick, of course, is to see what's actually there. You know, get beyond that it's pain, or that it feels bad, or that it's this or it's that, and just what is it that is there that makes me interpret it that way. And you'll discover this amazing universe of wonder. Pain is incredible. You know, but looking and seeing what is it made of? What's the experience actually made of? What specifically, substantially is appearing in experience when you feel pain? Or, you know, I mean, of course, the same thing applies to any experience whatsoever. But pain is interesting because we're used to immediately trying to distance ourselves from it, and at the same time kind of fixating on it. It's a very strange sort of polarity that happens with pain.
So I think, at least for me, our lives are caught up in seeking comfort, not just physical comfort, but where can I be emotionally comfortable, physically comfortable, you know, the pleasure sort of principle.
Sure.
And we're caught up in those. So then when that's, you're threatened with that being taken away, or it is taken away, then it is very disturbing, and it does shake the tree, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but in another sense, exploring pain can be facilitated by exactly that principle, because you can find a way to be with the pain, an orientation to be with the pain that is maximally comfortable, which in my experience involves a kind of an opening to it, and even penetrating it, as opposed to trying to hold it at bay or keep it at arm's length or something, which paradoxically seems to magnify it.
Biggest, what I've discovered is, even more than that, is if you have a little itch.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
Itches are good because they're just like pain, only it's a lesser example.
Yeah.
A minor pain is nice. If you have a slight discomfort somewhere in your body, but it's something you classify as a strong pain, that can be easier for beginners to practice on. Beginner pain meditation. And then you graduate to the full-on broken leg or
Yeah.
but if we have to heat up for a little while, I'll yell.
He said, what, that he's on.
Order.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm like 64 here.
Wow.
Where it is.
We can kick it up to 72 and then turn it off again. I'll bellow meanwhile.
Takes a little while for it to catch up. I've turned it up.
Takes me a while too.
Yeah.
We're up to a good bellow.
I want to see that.
You know, talking about experience, these different experiences, I've been playing around with trance, and the more I sort of look, you know, what's in front of me, more and more looks like a whole variety of different trances to me.
Absolutely.
And what's sort of nice about that is there's no, you know, sort of like, you know, riding the bicycle with your hands off the handlebars. You just sort of float on through it. It's and it's been pointing out to me more about experience, about the experience of experience, the sort of the texture of it.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that it shows up in, at least for me anyway, and I've looked this up, and like nobody seems to know what the hell trance is anyway, so that's good.
Where does that even refer to specifically?
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. But there's this sense of, well, like you said, you know, it's doing you. You know, you're. I'm not doing it. I'm just sort of floating on through this, which is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, no, for sure. You'll find once you get some skill with just sort of, you know, feeling your experience and being with your experience very directly, you can sort of deliberately begin to explore sort of altered states or non-usual perspectives. Not that they're not necessarily non-usual in any actual sense, but, you know, modes that you don't usually hang out in, or modes that aren't particularly natural to you that you gravitate towards. You know, you can deliberately, you know, try to explore, you know, states of, I don't know, I mean, just sort of surf around within your experience and find some bizarre, you know, perspective, you know, however you would qualify it, which of course is unqualifiable, and play with it and explore that. And all of that is grist for the mill in terms of being with the infinite varieties that they can present itself in.
Well, for me, I've noticed that there doesn't seem to be any difference.
No, of course, you discover everything's the same ultimately.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, when you're a skilled yogi, and you get to a certain point where wherever you go, there you are.
There you are, exactly.
But in a very obvious and profound sense, and you really get that. Wow, this is just one thing here. It can look like anything, but it's always just this, and that becomes just so blatantly obvious and palpable.
It takes a lot of the stress off. You know, you don't.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's liberation. You're liberated from stress. You're liberated from, you know, the urgency and the need to accomplish something or avoid something or achieve something or whatever, you're just sort of going with the flow and you work with what you got and it's all kind of basically pretty okay. Because if whatever happens, it's just going to be this.
Exactly.
Here I still am.
You can't do it wrong.
No, there's no wrong, there's no right. Can't do it wrong, can't do it right. Can't even do it. Can't stop doing it. Intoxication can be an interesting thing to explore, especially if you're not used to it. Let yourself have a few drinks or a little pot or whatever, a few mushrooms, whatever, however bold you're feeling. This is an experiment, just see what's that like, what's up with that. And lo and behold, at first you'll discover, no surprise, it's going to be variations on a theme. It's going to be, well, that's another way this can look.
I like the few seconds just between awakeness and sort of falling to sleep.
Oh yeah,
that's amazing.
That's an excellent time. And waking up as well, of course. Those are both excellent times. Transition states are particularly good for noticing because it's so blatantly obvious that it's not this or that.
Right.
I mean, every night you go to sleep, you're actually there. You're going to sleep. You're experiencing all of that. And of course, we typically, normally, I suppose, we don't usually make a big deal of that. We're sort of lying there and we're thinking or whatever we're doing, tossing around, and sort of at one point we're sort of blank. It sort of stops somehow. But if you really be with that transition, you'll notice you can begin to really kind of be present with its mutation into between waking and sleep, and it's fascinating to see how arbitrary the waking state is and how arbitrary the sleep state is, and how bizarre both of them are. Because how bizarre they are is really apparent at their fringes. When you're in the middle of them, it's all sort of self-sustaining and self-reinforcing, and it all seems very obvious. But when you get to the fringes, like when sleep, you get to the edge of waking and the beginning of sleep. From that perspective, the waking state is very interesting. It presents itself with a whole different implication.
I haven't been able to be at that place yet.
Just play with it. Don't worry about it.
It is possible.
Sure, find out. Play with it. With all this stuff, you just play with it. Right? Here's your experience. Have fun with it. Play with it. You go to sleep every night, at least.
I missed it.
and you're actually there. And even if you're not there, you're still there. I mean, in a sense, not being there is a mode of being there. Because if you're not there, who is? What is? Something's there.
Something's there.
Because sleep happens. Sleep isn't a simple nothingness.
And try staying awake for 24 hours and see what happens. You'll probably snooze off at some point.
And I missed that.
But it's not important that this exploration or that exploration is where the money is or where the payoff is. These are all just arbitrary experiments you can try, and ultimately you find the same thing. So again, it doesn't really matter where you look, because wherever you look, you will find what is to be found.
Is there a qualitative change or shift, or maybe something that you say, oh, like once time you talked about seeing the moments, you're seeing something in a new way.
Peter, the kid.
Project.
Okay, all right.
Say that.
Let's say, are there times when you're doing the noticing where you're fully cognizant of the fact that it's actually engaged?
Sure, of course.
This is it. Can you qualitatively express that somehow, so the person that's doing doesn't just say, did that work? Or, what am I doing? Where's the gauge? Sort of a self-assessment, maybe that's not quite right, but is there something to trigger the recognition that there's some subtle change, maybe that just the way you.
Well, it's not, it's a mistake to look at it as a change.
Okay.
And it's a mistake to look at it as doing it versus not doing it.
Okay.
But having said that, when you notice the instantaneity of experience, the instantaneous presence, how it's just bang, it's just here now, and it's nothing without any baggage, with nothing that comes along with that, no superstructure. It's sort of a very naked, instantaneous presence with enormous detail, but no elaboration.
So it's palpable then.
Oh, sure. But it's subtle because all experience is actually that. So, so perceiving that clearly is a good experiment, and it's definitely a sign that a revelation that that's it. But even when it's not that, that's it too. So it's so don't worry. In other words, don't worry about his question too much. But yeah.
So you said with enormous detail, but no elaboration.
Yes.
Can you
Because-
elaborate on that?
Yes, because your experiential presence has no elaboration. In other words, there's no backstory. There's no, there's no signs or posters giving you information.
But you can't.
You know how you go into a zoo and you go up to the animal's cage and there's a little plaque that says this is a so and so and it's found in in New Zealand and it's this and it's like the direct experience doesn't have any of that. Direct experience doesn't say what it is. It just is what it is, and it is what it is with absolute clarity and detail, without a description.
But you can go deeper into it.
Well, there's no limit to how deeply it can you can be with it.
Elaboration.
But no, because in actual fact, when you go deeper into it, you actually haven't gone deeper. There are no depths. It's always infinitely deep. The superficial experience is infinitely deep, and infinitely deep experience is infinitely deep.
So when somebody says like I am the sun, I am the sun and the moon, and I am the swirling stars. Is that so? That when you are like in here, you can't see any of that. What does that mean? It's just is that just a description, or?
I'm not sure I understand what the distinction
So
you're making.
I am not aware of what is outside of this.
Right. Yeah. So there's nothing outside of this in your direct experience, except for your ideas that there may be something outside of it, and those ideas are within your experience. So the word, so it doesn't exist as far as you know, except as an idea. And then you go outside and you look, and then that's real, but then this room doesn't exist. It's just a matter of being empirical. See, an important thing to understand, you come to see it, so you don't actually need to understand it. But the presence of your experiencing is what makes reality real. Reality is not real unless you're experiencing it. Your experience alone is reality, and your experiencing alone creates reality. So your experiencing is the way in which reality becomes real. You are the channel through which the universe emerges. But it only emerges as what your experience happens to look like in any given moment. And it only exists as your experience. Like when you go to sleep at night and you dream a dream, the dream is only there when you're dreaming it. To ask the question, well, what's outside the dream? When you're dreaming of being in a room, to wonder what's in the next room is silly. There is no next room, unless you dream it there, and then there is one. And so here you are here, you're seeing this room, I wonder what's through that wall. Well, through that wall is an idea, and there's no experience to support it. If you move, then all of a sudden everything shifts, of course. But in every instant, everything shifts anyway, just even as your attention moves, the focus of your attention, or what you're paying attention to, and so on. And that may sound like an abstraction, but if you look very closely, you'll discover that it's self-evidently true. It's a matter of being purely empirical. So when you question reality, you say, what do I mean by real? And ultimately, the canon of reality is what you experience. If I say there's a troop of pink elephants in the room, you might say, maybe not, I don't know, you might say, I don't experience that, so for me that's not real. So either you're nuts or you're experiencing an alternate reality, or I don't know what, right? So ultimately what you're experiencing is your only criteria for knowing what's real. And if someone tells you something that you don't think you would experience, you would say that's bullshit.
I had a thought, Peter. So our experience, or my experience of direct experience of reality is limited by what I have available with which to experience it.
No.
Like my eyes, my ears.
No.
But then, let's say, my experience of reality may be different from, say, a tortoise's.
No, a tortoise's experience of reality has no reality in your reality, except as a thought.
A sense is a thought?
Except as a thought.
Oh, except as a thought.
Yeah. Show me a tortoise's experience. Show me my experience. No, you can't, can you? So how real is it? It's an idea. You can entertain the idea that I'm having experience in the way that you are, but you can't know it. You can't point to it. You can't demonstrate. You can't prove it. I could be a hallucination you're having. How would you know?
But what I experience has to, my eyes see a certain way. My eyes see color a certain way. I don't know how you see color or how.
That's the point. You don't. So it doesn't exist for you. You don't even know if I see color.
So what I experience as reality is just my experience of reality.
Correct. And it's the sole experience of reality as far as you know. You are the sole experiencer as far as you know. You are the only experiencer you have access to. And you can have the idea that there's other experiencers. And you can suppose that all the people that you see around you are actually experiencers too, but you can't know that. That's just a hypothesis. You can't disprove it, but you can't know it. You can't know one way or the other.
That goes for past experience too, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You're claiming to have had an experience.
Absolutely. Memory is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Memory is basically a theory,
Yeah.
an assertion, and memory is only real if it's occurring in the present moment, and the only reality of memory is what's occurring in the present moment. So if I say I remember what I had for lunch yesterday, I'm talking about a mental, basically imaginary experience that's happening now. It has absolutely nothing to do with any supposed yesterday and then supposed lunch.
Or similarly for the future.
Of course, what future?
Right.
Show me the future. Show me the past.
So, in a sense, you could say the past never happened.
Well, you can't know whether or not it happened, but the whole thing is very slippery. There's obviously an enormous intricacy of interrelatedness between the patterns that we remember and patterns that are occurring and apparent causality and so on and so forth. So, it's an open question. It's interesting, and as well, if you look at the present moment, it's a slippery phenomenon present moment is kind of slipping into the past every instant, and the future is kind of appearing every instant. But of course, you can't pin down exactly whether that's so or how that's so. So, but again, it's not. The present is not a simple, sort of a simple closed, findable thing that has any limitation whatsoever. So the whole thing is very open-ended and open for question. But in any simple sense, memory is a present event. Anticipation of the future is a present event. Theories about causality and chains of events are present events, and they're all essentially imaginary or hypothetical projections. Yeah, and you can't say much more about it really. That doesn't disprove or prove anything, but it's an interesting, it's a nice reality check because it could be drastically different than we maybe usually assume it is, and the evidence might still support that. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But just to have a simplistic assumption that sort of the normal consensus reality idea of a continuum of time where the past exists is real in some sense, and the future is going to happen, and I mean all of that is just an elaborate fantasy. And again, you can't disprove that, but if you look closely at the evidence, things seem curiously slippery.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like in a dream, you can dream about something that happened in the past, and then when you wake up, it's clear that all that past never happened.
Of course.
Yeah, it was just a dream, and maybe in the same sense, what we believed actually happened never really happened.
Yeah, and if you look closely at memory always deviates from the actuality, no matter how detailed the memory. You can have a really precise memory of what you had for lunch yesterday, but the experience of that memory is different than the experience of sitting there and having your lunch.
It tasted better the first time.
Yeah, exactly. It tastes much better. Fewer calories in the memory. But the whole issue is very curious. And the point isn't of course, to pin down the way it is. The point is to look at what undeniably actually is, which essentially is the presence of your present experience, period. And anything beyond that, you're going into hypothesis and possibility and interpretation, which again is still your present experience on the level essentially of imagination.
In a way, could you almost say that's how creation happens? It's like the entertaining possibility, and then that has other implications.
Well, maybe yes, maybe no, who knows?
Because if you entertain that there's space and time, then there's a bunch of implications for that, right? But you could say maybe there is no space or time, it's just now, and then it's a whole different set of rules and it's
Absolutely.
dimensions or realms.
Yeah. I mean, you can play with, and you can quite deliberately play with, sort of positing that things are a certain way, and then let yourself feel what the implications of that would be like. What would it be like if there was no past and there was no future and there's only the present moment, and somehow the past is a present moment projection that never existed, but somehow is projected in a way that has seemed to exist. And so, I mean, you can do that, and then what would that feel like? So to be with the feeling tone of what would reality be like? What would it feel like if that was true?
And then you kind of don't discover that none of these basic premises that you're playing with can be pinned down, right?
Can be what?
Pinned down or resolved or anything.
Yeah.
And so then it kind of makes all of them
well, all of these,
actually more hypothetical.
Yeah, all these perspectives are viable to the extent they are. And so you're in an open-ended, crossroads of infinite potential interpretations, none of which ever concretize or crystallize. And that's very interesting. Why don't we take a 5-minute break just so we get up and stretch or take a few minutes of, you just think the video now.
Startled you, didn't
No, that never works. I don't know. I feel like I only. I process
I'm trying to figure out what's different about it. Have you got your hair done?
Left it alone. Stop putting the stuff on it. I stopped putting the stuff on like in a tent. Just leave it alone. Let it be itself. Sit on it.
Yeah, because I could tell. I could like, okay, he didn't have a mustache, so he didn't shave that.
This is my natural color. Let's put it that way. I was putting some stuff on. Well, I got into that when I was working, and I thought, this would get me more jobs. I said, I'm retired now. What do I care?
You're so cute. Boy.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, yeah. And then you go through your own thing of, well, all right, I have to go out and do that, or somebody wants to set that or something like that.
What's that? How it is. Yeah, I was trying to go to the last
Very subtle.
Moving different positions.
musical chairs.
This might be.
So it's a good bit after 3. We can go for maybe another hour or so, depending on how we hold up. I know these all-day events are a little grueling, but there's no reason to be to punish ourselves. So. But just to reiterate, the whole brunt of this is to feel what is present directly and beyond description, and let the power of that work out. Which of course is very simple because you're already always doing it.
What's timing fit in all this?
I'm sorry?
What timing? You know, the reality of timing, like,
Yeah.
the best way I can explain it is, I've said people, they roll their eyes, but I absolutely, with no doubt in the world, feel something new is coming on Earth, you know. And like, if you would have told somebody in the 50s, there's gonna be a 60s, they would have laughed and said, you know. So I feel, so the other day, I mean, I was just really feeling this, that something new is coming into consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. And then I went on my computer and I learned on Facebook, and I wasn't sure if I created this, I mean, it was real, it was experience, that this guy was talking about he had just taken mushrooms, and then he was talking about something real's coming to Earth. You could see it while he was on the mushroom trip, and then he was saying, you know, that we're all wired, you know, our brain's all wired up to programming. So I thought, wow, did I make this happen so I can have somebody agree with me, you know?
Well, if someone saw it on mushrooms and saw it on Facebook, it must be true.
I have a program now. So it made me think, you know, everything's already here, but does timing sort of block it before it comes forth?
Timing is timing is whatever it is. What happens happens when it happens.
Yeah,
And its rhythm, if any, is its own and inscrutable. So, I mean, that nothing like that could possibly be determined or not one way or the other. I mean, when you even go looking for time or for timing, you discover these notions are very elusive, and you can't actually pin down exactly what that is. So that being the case, trying to predicate something on that is getting a little far afield.
yeah, no, I do, I get that, but there's just something about it's all here.
Sure.
And sometimes you can feel it, it doesn't mean it's here, but you can feel something.
Well, but what appears when it appears.
True.
And even when it appears to you, if it appears to you.
Yeah.
And it may or may not appear to someone else. So, you know.
What about the mass timing, though, when something, just all of a sudden,
There is no mass timing.
really?
No, mass timing is composed of a composite of individuals. Because experience only happens individually. There's no objective experience. So in the 60s, there was no the 60s. There was your 60s and my 60s and your 60s, and they were all different. And they may arguably have had some overtly common elements, but those common elements were made entirely of specifics which were 100% different. So the sort of consensus reality or generalizations about, what's going on for groups of people is a pure fantasy.
But it did come into an agreement, whether you had an experience in the 65 or every individual had a different experience in the 60s, there was one agreement that pulled it all forth.
I don't think so.
Really?
I don't think so.
So
You might agree with people that you happen to agree with, but you could probably find people who would disagree with you, and so then where's the agreement?
And I know a bunch of Republican, conservative type people from the 60s were very different.
I'm sure a lot of people think the 60s never happened. They were like, what 60s?
Wow.
And isn't that consensus reality?
Well, yeah, but consensus reality is a pretense. There is no such thing. Consensus reality is finding someone who will echo your words back to you. But just because the words are being echoed doesn't mean that the experience is the same.
So this all proves that each person has their own reality.
Of course, that's self-evident.
That's it. And
Of
I can
course.
try to grab hold of the 60s and say everybody was alive.
There's only your 60s.
Yeah.
And your 60s were very much your 60s, and someone else's 60s were very much theirs. And, your 60s was made exactly out of the specific experiences that you had, which are completely unique, and no one else had those experiences.
That's it.
So the more you are comfortable with lapsing into generalizations, the more you can find agreement. But generalizations are, by their very nature, falsehoods. Generalizations never happen. Specifics happen. And the argument that a group of specifics that are similar enough justifies a generalization is pure abstraction.
Then you can go into agreement and go, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's all fantasy.
So that's the same thing with anything.
Of course.
So how does this work for you? You might reflect on this morning. We all sat here this morning
Sure.
in discussion, and you may or may not say something about what was discussed this morning.
Sure.
And almost all of us might agree that discussion took place,
Sure.
even though in our memory in this moment, we have a different experience. Each one of us have a different experience.
Yeah.
For you, do you experience such a memory of experience by allowing it to play without buying into its objective reality?
Yes, exactly so. I use it in whatever manner is convenient.
Mm-hmm.
So I might solidify it more, concretize it more, or open it up more, depending upon what's convenient for my strategy.
But the key is whether it be the example I just used or any other experience that you're even having now versus any memory or future contemplating. It's a matter of not taking it as a conceptual, objective reality.
Right.
But, okay.
It's nothing, you cannot know what anything is, so all the options of possible interpretations are on the table, and so you're free to use any of those at your convenience, or not. If you have a purpose to. Like, for example, in this current situation, it could be argued I'm presenting a talk or I'm doing a presentation. So there's a large degree of manipulation and deliberateness involved in what I do and the way what I say and the way that I say it. So I can direct whatever strategy is convenient to me by choosing to emphasize, potentialities that are convenient to my purpose, even if there are only one potential way of seeing something in the context of many other potential ways of seeing it. In other words, I'm free to spin doctor my own version of things for my own purposes, if any.
As I am free to spin doctor my response or hearing it.
Of course. And so the way to maximize my possibilities is to allow access to any and all potential ways of seeing it, so that I can draw on those that are most convenient for my purposes. Rather than the way politicians come up with their version of things for the convenience of their argument.
Are you looking for votes?
I'm not. I am not running for public office at this time.
However, if Hillary falters, somebody's got to get the.
That's right. However, I will consider at some future.
So this leaves you totally alone.
Of course, I'm totally alone.
I mean, everybody is, so.
Of course.
We're
Alone, but not alone. I mean, you're here. But you're only here because I'm here. As far as I know.
Well, we agree that we're all here, yeah.
No, we don't necessarily agree on that at all.
Okay, so we're all alone.
Well, what I am alone exists. But I'm not alone. Well, it depends on what you mean by the word alone. There's nothing whatsoever that I'm separate from. So an aloneness that implies some separation or some limitation.
No, I meant
It's not the
your
truth.
reality, that each one of our.
I am the
realities-
sole inhabitant of my reality.
Yeah. That's what I meant.
And if you exist, you're the sole inhabitant of your
Yeah,
reality.
that's what I meant, yeah. For some reason, that's really.
But see the truth of that. See the way in which that's so. You are the only experiencer you ever have experienced of. You're the only actuality seeing your experience. No one else or nothing else sees your experience. And you can't know for a fact whether or not anyone else sees any experience. They might well. It kind of looks like they do. There's a whole lot of them. But you can't know that. That's just a hypothesis you can have. In a dream, you can be interacting with any number of people. You can have very intense interactions. And you wake up and you think at that time they weren't even there. There was no one there. I was alone in the dream. It might not have felt like I was alone, but now it doesn't feel like I'm alone in the sense I'm alone in the room. But in actuality, I'm just as alone now as if there was no other humans in this room. But see the way in which that's so, because it's a reality check.
It's still a scary check for me.
Well, it's only scary because you're in the habit of seeing it other than that.
Trying to grapple with some degree.
And it's easy to see that as some kind of a loss or some kind of a challenge, perhaps, to your normal way of seeing it. But if you look at it closely, nothing is lost, nothing is challenged. It doesn't really threaten anything. It's just simply acknowledging the truth, which is that you alone see your experience.
That's it.
Of course. And that's self-evident. I mean, that's not a very big leap. and that being the case, so what? What are the implications? Well, I mean, in one sense, the implications are very interesting. In another sense, it's a complete it's So what? You know, here we are having this conversation. But does it matter whether or not you exist? I can still have the conversation, even if you're just a projection.
Yeah.
Or if I'm just a projection.
It's crazy.
I think the conversation that you had with Mark about spin has given me an insight into previous conversations about navigation.
Yes. Very much, very appropriate. Good observation.
Because it doesn't seem like quite where you can't make these things occur, like cause and effect, but you sort of get to spin them.
You can selectively emphasize whatever, or you can attempt to selectively emphasize whatever perspective is convenient or interesting for you
Right.
at any point.
Right. Right.
And that can be a kind of a fulcrum.
Right.
It might lead you into another orientation where you can continue doing more of the same.
Right.
Skillful means, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and not just spin in terms of the way you act with other people, but spins in terms of your own internal orientation. You know, you can kind of emphasize for yourself a sort of a pseudo bias or a pseudo way of seeing things provisionally or hypothetically, just to kind of give you a jump start in that direction, and then which might lead to whatever, so on and so forth.
So this is offering me a way to ask this question that I was really not sure how to put. So when you initially said, whenever, that I heard about infants and how they are, and I just remember
Right.
I've been fascinated with that and really paying attention to that and seeing how they have not been indoctrinated into a sense of self.
Right. Or a sense of anything.
A sense of anything. And then we are. And then that falls into my belief. And
What falls into your belief? This,
that I'm a self.
Right.
That I'm
Sure.
that I am. And when Dania talked about scary, that brought me to, I hope this doesn't sound silly, how there is a fear. You know, if someone were to contemplate no self, you read, people want to awaken and be liberated, but they fear this no self.
But it's a misunderstanding.
That's what I want.
It's the fantasy of no self as a loss. That now there is a self, and somehow that's going to be taken away or negated or canceled out or executed. It's not like that at all. Self is a misunderstanding, and when you see there's no self, it's just a more accurate understanding of the present condition. It's not a change of condition. Right now there's no self. This is what no self looks like, and you may be interpreting it as a self. And when you come to see the way in which it's no self, that may add to your repertoire and may add to your perspectives in terms of ways to orient to this. But it doesn't imply necessarily a loss or an extermination or something like that.
Because I've heard words like annihilation, I've heard words like emptiness. I mean, is that just simply people's overlay?
Well, it's words, no word is accurate. And all words are burdened with an implication, which is always problematic. All these words that people use it in the spiritual technical terms, in context, are meaningful to the extent in relation to what they're attempting to refer to. But they're not necessarily meaningful in terms of the implication of the word in a pure sense. I mean, emptiness implies a kind of a negation or an elimination or a sort of a nothingness or sort of taking an eraser and blotting out everything.
Yeah.
But emptiness isn't that. Emptiness is a technical term that refers to the condition that I've been talking about as unresolvability. empty of self-nature. The original formula in Buddhism was all dharmas are empty of self-nature, which basically means that once you look at anything, you cannot pin down exactly what it is. So it's not the emptiness, they're using the word emptiness, implying a kind of a nothingness or a negation or a negativity or something. It's a wholly wrong implication. Because the actuality of empty of self-nature actually increases the informational content of any entity, not diminishes it. It becomes more, not less, so it's an increase.
What is it that comes more?
The informational content of any entity. So if you're just you, and I think I know what that is, then that's a you, that is something, and there's a certain amount of information there. If I look at you, and I discover I don't know what you are, so I begin to gather data, and I begin to research, and I find more and more and more and more and more. And the more I look, the more I find. And it never actually comes together into any whole. There's just more and more information that's just sort of more or less there, and it's floating around in a cloud, but it doesn't really amount to anything coherent. So where's Nancy? What is that? And yet there's this universe of information, which is actually much more complex and interesting.
It just
That,
can't
oh,
get
that's
pinned
just
down.
Nancy, and she's like so and so.
But it can't get pinned down, is what you're saying.
Yes, and that it can't get pinned down means or indicates the way in which there is an infinite depth of information that is present in everything and anything.
It's a corollary.
Yeah, everything and anything is an infinity, literally. There is no such thing as finiteness. Infinity is the sole actual condition. I mean, in a very literal, specific sense, not in a theoretical sense.
Well, in this moment, it's just very lovely to discover or to hear or to that there's nothing to be afraid of.
Of course not. On the contrary, the state of actuality is much less to be afraid of there than in any of the states we ordinarily imagine. The states are full of all sorts of problems.
So what keeps me kind of stuck in this notion of I'm a person, I'm a self, is just like a habitual belief.
It's oriented to a narrow self-image and assuming that it's comprehensive. It is not. It's a caricature. It's just like if you went to an amusement park and someone drew a caricature of you and said, "This is what you look like." It's not what you look like. It's a grotesque exaggeration and heavy-handed partialization of what you look like.
So these ways that you're inviting us to kind of play with reality in this kind of more diffuse are all.
Well, notice that it is diffuse. Reality is diffuse. Reality is intrinsically fuzzy. Reality is not sharp. It's a good book title. Reality is fuzzy. Throw in a worm there and you can make it a children's book.
Well, I keep saying here, every time I come listen to you, got it upside down. It's just.
Well, that's actually almost literally true. Consensus reality view is pretty precisely 180 degrees opposite from reality. What people normally think is important is completely what's unimportant. And what people normally think is unimportant is completely what's important. Very curiously enough.
It's just written about it in such a, I don't know what other people have read, but just such a scary, like.
Words are inadequate.
Wow, that's.
Don't believe what you read.
Rippy.
You know, we were talking about this at great length this morning, but words are predicated upon the notion of definability, of resolvability, and there is no such thing. So words are intrinsically wrong, not just a little wrong, but completely and utterly and intrinsically wrong.
Wow.
Words are based on the notion that you can specify a this that is a this that is different from a that that is a that, and you can know what the that is and you can know what the this is. And no such condition exists, period. Never has, never will.
And I hear that, and I read that, you know, with what you write and say and blah, 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 and everywhere. But to hear this.
But look for yourself and see the way in which it's true. It's not just a notion, it's actually self-evident when you see it. You know, pick any word and look at what that word refers to and try and see if it coheres into something, into an undeniable specificity that is that. Because experience isn't like that. Experience opens to just too much information. As soon as you look at any experience whatsoever, you very rapidly get to TMI.
But the idea of self is a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding. That to me
it's an oversimplification.
Oversimplification.
Of course. But all ideation is oversimplification. When you classify it if something is being something, you're oversimplifying what it actually is. It's not that it's not that, but it's so much more than that. Well, maybe including that. It's just to render holding it to be that as laughable. It's not that you're not a self, it's that you're so much more than what you think self is, as to render your notion of self pathetic and laughable. Ideas are essentially censorship. They're essentially censorious. So when you say what something is and you pretend to be able to define it and know what it is, you are creating a limited entity in the face of an actuality which is unlimited. So you're taking something vast and pretending to make it very small. So it's you're cutting out a lot. You're censoring. Remember, like censorship. You know, you take a letter and you start crossing out words until there's only 2 words left on the page, whatever. I mean, it's like that. Experience is this vast barrage of an overload of inconceivable and essentially incompatible information with absolute dynamism. And out of that, the mind, you know, takes a few very selective portions and says, oh, this is this and that's that. And all the rest, everything which doesn't conform or support those notions is just ignored.
It's quite paradoxical because all this time you're talking, you're using words to try to do it.
Well, sure.
What does it say?
Take words away, what do we got?
Yeah, but it's working for me.
You have experience.
These are points.
Experience is vast, words are very small. And words are actually experience. Words aren't really words. So that's why you can use words and not be entrapped by words.
Trojan horse, right?
Yeah. If you have the wit to not let yourself be hampered by them. Don't trip over your own words.
There are many scholars that have been saying this for about 30 years, but nobody wants to listen. I mean, it's, yeah, quite a few.
Great minds.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
Words exist in the context of experience. You can't, words aren't actually separate from experience. It's not like words are over here and experience is over here. Here is experience, and where do words happen? Right here. What are words made of? Are they made, it's like everything, experience is one thing, and then words are made of something else. They aren't. They're made of experience. Words are experience. So words are much more than words. Words are the way in which the words are said. I mean, I can say a sentence like this, or I can say a sentence like this. You know, there's a whole lot of content there that is included with the words. There's the content of the ideas that I mean by the words, which can be implied by the sort of the general context of the words, and so on and so forth. So words are like Trojan horses. They can convey a vast amount of information, more than just the dictionary meaning of what the words are supposed to be referred to.
So recently I've been working with my clients focusing on the notion of ego or whatever you want to call it. And for the most part, they experience, or they're saying that it would be scary. I mean, I'm looking at this parallel now with what you're telling me. And they're saying it would be scary if they weren't living in this role, if they weren't living in this concept of themselves. It would be scary, like, who am I? And I was trying to get a grasp about, well, okay, so here's a mirror of me, and what I see here is that I had this notion of scary to lose this sense of self, but I see that it would not be scary for them to lose this role that they live in, and so now I'm having a better way of seeing how, well, if this isn't scary here, then this.
Also, it's a misunderstanding to suppose you have to lose a role. You don't lose it, you augment it. You can still play that role, but all of a sudden you have access to variation.
Yes, that I wasn't saying it correctly. Because they think that role is who they are.
Yeah, and they're going to lose something if they lose it. If they don't, you don't lose it. You get to be more than that. You can be that if it's convenient, but you can actually be more than that. It's like an actor being able to play variations on a role rather than being stuck with only one thing you can do, and only one way you can do it.
So then in seeing that with this self, once I'm just trying to wrap my brain around this, I can see this self as more than how I'm seeing it. Like they're seeing this role, or they could see this role as more than they're seeing it.
Well, it's the other way around. The role is less than they have available. And by drawing on what they have available, much of that will go beyond the role. And so we'll give them more options that they can manifest.
I just didn't get that, and I wasn't ready to tell.
Well, it's not important.
Yeah, no, it is, because,
Because what you are is not less than you think you are. It's more than you think you are.
What I am is more.
Because you have aspects to yourself that you're perhaps not counting, or they're irrational and you can't designate them, or they haven't been brought into a circumstance where they can manifest, so you're not even aware that they're there. But any self-definition or self-image or idea of who you are is partial relative to the actuality you are, which is bound to have all sorts of qualities that aren't being included in what you're used to acknowledging. So by acknowledging those qualities or allowing yourself to draw on them, you are allowing yourself to be more than your normal role. But it doesn't necessarily exclude or preclude your normal role. You can still do your shtick, be limited old me, if that's convenient for you too. So you don't lose anything.
You can play it, but there's more.
Play any role. Yeah.
I think I'm hearing from you a little different way of looking at this notion of being a separate entity.
Yes.
As you know, in non-dual circles, there's a lot of discussion around the presumption of being a separate entity and the necessity for seeing the limitations and the illusory nature of that and dropping away from it. But if I'm hearing you correctly right now, it sounds as if you might be saying even the belief or the experiencing of separate entity-ness is part of that grander self.
It's a mode, sure, because
even if you're identified, what aspects of it that lead to suffering?
Sure, but you don't have to identify because there's always more than that. In other words, you have more options. You can also identify with that.
Sure.
In other words, you have let's say you have a vast openness that you are, and you're designating this portion of it as you're acknowledging this portion of it as you. Okay, but this over here that you're not acknowledging is also you. But you don't need to suppress all acknowledgement of identity. Identity is arbitrary. If you want to manifest identity, that's fine. But that doesn't mean you're locked into it. You're not actually creating a separate entity just because you're manifesting identity. You're just, let's say, strategically bringing to the fore a particular focus that, for whatever reason, may be useful to you.
So to the degree that that is seen clearly, that the self that you are has far more potential about it
that's the
than
point.
this identified entity, then the tendency to identify dissolves, or at least doesn't arise.
Well, the need to have a locked-in identity dissolves, and then identity can manifest at convenience,
right,
or not.
Yeah.
But it's not like you need to suppress it.
Right.
You need to become plain vanilla. I am no.
Yeah, the suppressing would even make it go away anyway. It would only
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. But you see, this all hinges on noticing the nature of identification. Identification is always focusing on specifics, and specifics always exist in a context of more than them. So you're basically isolating or emphasizing specific qualities in any identification. I mean, like I can talk about that chair. When I talk about that chair, I'm isolating specific qualities which are as yet to be specified, that I'm defining as being that chair. And in doing so, I am emphasizing those qualities at the exclusion of other qualities, like that chair or the floor. But I'm not actually creating a separate entity, unless you're very gullible. All of a sudden, oh wait, where'd that chair come from? But I can also say there's no chair, there's a continuum of my visual field. And now I've erased the chair as a point of emphasis, as a point of identification. But nothing has happened. The chair was not actually created when it was designated, and it wasn't actually erased when it was dissolved back into the continuum. Because the nature of identification or let's say designation, defining, creates a virtual point of focus within the continuum. The continuum is always present. You can't get rid of it, right? You can't get rid of reality. It comes with. But any and everything exists in the context of reality. Reality comes along with, and identification is simply designating and emphasizing, at least conceptually, if not in other practice, a specific aspects of the continuum. But the continuum doesn't go away when you do that. You haven't actually created a separate entity. There is no separation. A separate entity cannot exist. So you don't need to actually worry about too much, because it's an impossibility.
So the focusing, which I guess you could also call identification, rises to the degree that it's necessary in the moment. Like you may want to see that as the chair because you want to sit down. But
well, it arises as necessary, but it can also arise out of a kind of neurotic compulsion or a deluded, confused compulsion, which is what's more often seen as a problem in spiritual terms, where you have a compulsion to identify things in certain ways, and that compulsion leads you to certain implications which are problematic. And so the whole point of spirituality is to discover the arbitrary nature of that and how you're not actually stuck in that context and you're not actually subject to it. Which doesn't mean you can't do it or you have to erase it or suppress it. It just means it turns out actually it's not so much of a problem.
So give an example.
Because you're not actually stuck with the implications of your own definitions. And if you are, you're free to redefine, because defining is arbitrary. Identifying is arbitrary. Both in any case whatsoever, even in terms of identifying yourself.
So what would be an example more compulsive, negative way of doing that.
Well, if you're locked into thinking, oh, I am a certain thing and my situation is a certain thing and it's a real problem and it's a pain in the butt and I'm screwed. You know, life sucks, I can't wait to die. I mean, that might have the flavor of being a problem.
Right.
Whereas if you have the wherewithal to come to see, wow, that's not really actually the case. That's only, you know, a heavy-handed partial interpretation of something that can actually be seen in many other ways, each of which has very different implications. Then all of a sudden you're relatively unstuck from the problematic configuration. And this, I mean, this is part and parcel of the whole spiritual situation. You know, we're prey to our own confused interpretations, but the fallacy that you're stuck with them is a fallacy, and you can discover that it's a fallacy, and then you're no longer stuck with it, and that's liberation. How nice.
I've been thinking of it lately as a bunny costume.
Bunny costume, I like that. That's a good one.
Get up every morning and you put on your bunny costume.
Sure.
Everybody gets used to seeing you in the bunny costume, so they treat you like a bunny. So after a while, you start to think you're a bunny, but you can take it off. And you
That's right. Put on another costume.
And when you take it off, it's just a heap of fabric laying on the floor. There's
Right.
nothing there. There's
Yeah.
no bunniness about
That's
it.
right. You can put on your Wonder Woman costume instead.
That's
You're
right.
Superman.
So you can pick any costume you want to wear, or you could just try no costume at all.
At all.
It's just-
Yeah, absolutely.
And that shouldn't be scary. I'm just stuck on this whole scary business.
Well, you could also think of it as freedom,
Yeah.
because that bunny costume can be constraining. You get tired of being the bunny every day. Maybe you're not feeling particularly bunny-like today.
It's a ubiquitous and very common fallacy that permeates spirituality. That somehow having a definition, it permeates more than spirituality, it permeates human psychology, that somehow having a definition is a good thing. Having a story is a good thing. It's a safe thing. You know, if you ask me who I am and I can't answer you, that's like, oh no, big problem. But if you ask me who I am and say, oh, I'm so-and-so and I live in so-and-so, what I do is so-and-so, and my life is so-and-so, and I like this and I don't like that. When you can regurgitate this whole scenario, all of it, when you have a convincing identity you can project, then you're acknowledged as being a good game player. You're playing the game, you're one of us. We're not going to drive you out or nail you to a cross or throw you in jail or whatever it is we do to people that aren't good game players. And so it's seen as safe because you're blending in with the herd, with the tribe. You're playing the human game.
Well, I'm less interested in that, so I was making a bargain, kind of. And that was, well, you know, I don't need my story. You know, I don't give really a shit about that anymore, and I don't give a shit about fitting in anymore. But I was fearful, or have been, or am, of, like, you know, the absence of the self. Because
what is the fear? What is the fear?
I guess I had
What are
this,
you afraid of? What's the consequence that is frightening? What's the fantasy of the horrible thing that will happen?
okay, so the fantasy is what I've read about this emptiness, and that it would be dark and bleak and
the dark, bleak horror of limitless infinite life.
serious. Wow.
Well, there's vulnerability in it, I think. I think that's what's, you know, there's a nakedness when you let go of the costumes or whatever. That story that you tell yourself, what Damien was expressing earlier, that.
But you're thrown on spontaneity. You can't rely on your tried and true and your shtick. You know, you have to actually come up with something.
There's no real vitality otherwise.
Well, I don't know if that's true.
What do you mean by otherwise?
I think it would be more vital, really.
No. When you're the bunny.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right, when you're the bunny, there's less vitality.
Right.
Because you're denying the spontaneity of your life force.
Right. The freedom. I mean, you can look at it as freedom, or you can look at, you know, as scary. And psychologically, I think we all grow very accustomed to the comfort, the familiarity of the bunny costume. And, you know, we know that people are gonna treat us a certain way when they see us in the bunny costume. You know what I mean? There's just you know your place in the world, and when you take that away, there is a vulnerability and emptiness and a nakedness that can be psychologically, you know.
Right. But see, all of that is centered on the human game, on playing the social game of fitting in and who you are, and your identity, and that whole thing. But, you know, when you open yourself to the vastness of that is actually present in what we actually are, which completely is very much more than human, while not excluding the human game. It's a big gain. So far from being a loss, you get to gain so much more than that, because you know, so many of the non-human options are just really exciting and vibrant and interesting and vital.
Well, there's a fullness in emptiness. It's never been my
Yeah, it's fullness.
interpretation when the teachings talked about emptiness. I mean,
But you have to
full.
with emptiness, you have to understand what's being referred to.
Yeah.
If you fix it on the word and just have a narrow interpretation of it, but this is true of any word, you have to take it in context of what it's referring to and see the actuality that's being referred to.
Because if you take all this sort of flotsam and jetsam of our smaller lives, and you remove that, then the bunny costumes, then you might think of that as emptiness.
Yeah.
Removed all that, then it just becomes so full of everything.
But you don't need to actually remove it. Just notice that exists in a context which is utterly beyond that, which also comes with, which you also want.
That's how you be in everything.
Yeah.
Because
everything comes with.
Yeah.
Here you are, but here's everything, and you show me where the line is. Where's the place where the scissors will cut it? You know, you gotta find it.
Like Melanie said, you can change it all of them back and forth, off and on. But then when you really get it, then you can be everything. What a powerful way of being.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's being nobody.
Yeah. Nobody / anybody.
Yeah. That's exciting. Yeah.
Whole different.
But don't you have to go through this, the part of being nobody first, though? You know, that's the part the mind goes, well, you don't want to be nobody. Don't you know?
Not necessarily.
Nobody first?
Not necessarily, no.
I like it.
You can discover more.
The what?
More. Here I am, here's Peter Brown, here's my personality, here's my neuroses, but there's more than that. So I don't need to somehow de-emphasize or diminish or in any way negate Peter Brown in order to see the more. The more is here anyway. And so, firmly entrenched in Peter Brown, I can still notice the more. And wow, the more is here, I can't make it go away. It always comes with. It's always a part of me. So even if I'm being a me, the more non-me comes with. So it's essentially me too, in the sense that it's always there. I can't make it go away. And then you look at the more, and the more actually goes out inclusively to all of reality. And so here's Peter Brown, sure, but all of reality comes with. And there's no actual demarcation. There's no actual moat or line or wall or gate. There's no boundary. So yeah, I am Peter Brown, but I'm all of reality. Because when Peter Brown goes, reality psychology, it really has nothing to do with you or your functioning. Everyone's faking it because when you're a little child, you don't know anything. And then your parents in society come along and say, no, but you have to know these various things. And you never really do, but you learn that if you pretend you do, they're happy. So you start pretending. And if you're skillful, you get really good at pretending. But you always know in your heart of hearts that you're pretending, so you're in a horrible dread that they're going to find out.
But
This is, I mean, isn't that true? I mean, it's just a human normalcy.
I saw an episode of The Sopranos, maybe somebody remembers this particular episode. I don't suppose it hasn't anything really to do with non-duality, but it always helps me when I'm feeling like restricted in that small self. And it's when, what's his name, Tony, wakes up from his heart attack, and somebody's written on the chalkboard, and I won't get it exactly right. It's an old Chinese proverb, and he wrote on the chalkboard. He looks up, he doesn't know who had written it. Sometimes I move about in pity for myself, and all the while a great wind is blowing across the sky. I just love that because it just reminds you that you're not that. All the while, you probably don't think I'm moving.
I remember that.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I've never forgotten it.
It's wonderful.
But the point is that this is really self-evident. You can see it for yourself anytime you want. And if you observe it enough, it finally penetrates and it becomes just a palpable felt sense of your presence that you include all this. You come with everything else, and everything comes with everything else. And so you begin to get the scale of things, and you begin to get the inherent relationship of aspects of this with other aspects of this that is absolutely inclusive. And you don't need to rely upon formulas or particular ways to see it or this or that, because it itself is always displaying this clearly and openly every instant of your experience. Just look and see what your experience is, and it's self-evident. Experience is a field, experience is a continuum. The experiential field is everything you're experiencing, and it's all right here, right now, and you can't make any portion of it go away. It has no off switch. And in the mind, we pretend we can slice it and dice it and separate it into this and that, and me and not me, etc., etc. But all that's a pretense. Because the full field always comes with it. It's always right here. And if you don't know that, just look and see. It's not like it's even hard to see. I mean, here's experience. Try and find edges. Try and find boundaries.
So noticing those experience seems to be affected by material things.
By, sorry, what?
By material things. Like I carry lunch affects my sense of noticing.
Yes. Yes,
So,
but heavy lunch is itself an experience. So experience is continually interacting with itself. The conditions are continually changing. As a dynamic interaction as all these conditions present themselves in a sort of an interactive gestalt continually. But it's not that any of it is necessarily material or non-material. It's all just different aspects of what's showing up experientially. And all of these aspects reflect and embody the flavor of your experiencing at the time, which might show up as more clarity or less clarity, or however you want to characterize it.
so you're saying that the semblance of clarity is not clarity itself.
No, I'm saying the opposite of that. I'm saying everything is clarity.
Okay.
So when it's unclear, that is a type of clarity. Experience is always clearly experienced, even when it's murky. When experience seems to be murky, that murkiness is experienced with absolute clarity. If you have a high fever and you're completely out of it, you know that fact with absolute clarity. If you're drunk and falling over and you can barely see, you know that fact with absolute clarity because it's present experientially with absolute clarity. So all of these different flavors of experience are all present with equal presence, equal clarity.
Well, if everything's clear, what's the point of noticing?
To notice that.
Oh, good question.
Well, but it's, why, well,
There's no point in it if you already know that. If you have that recognition, then you don't need to remind yourself of it.
but if you don't have the recognition, then maybe, does that mean there's no clarity?
No, it means you may be under the mistaken notion that there's degrees of quality and there's better and there's worse and there's clear and there's more unclear. And there's success and failure and there's suffering and there's not suffering and there's winning and losing. And all of a sudden you're in the throes of a potentially problematic worldview. And when you see that all of this potentially problematic worldview exists in your imagination only, then you're free of it. And so that's the point of seeing is to discover that fact that you're free of that. And whether or not experience is always clear or not, it's just is an aspect of that. And if you ask ultimately what difference does it make, the answer is it doesn't. You know, why be free of delusion? Why be free of suffering? You know, hey, have at it. You know, whatever. So the condition is actually the same. So there's no difference whatsoever. It's really just a matter of personal opportunity.
Yeah, it's just what I hear. There's always clarity. There is no delusion, but yet then there is delusion. Well, it's a contradiction, I guess.
Well, it's a matter of seeing the way in which that is so. Delusion is only delusion if you believe it. When you see that delusion can be present, but you know it's just delusion, then you're not under its sway. So it's not a matter of eliminating delusion. It's like interpretations. No interpretation can be accurate because the conditions being interpreted have essentially too much unresolvable information present to be subsumed within a definition or a way of seeing it, you know, with proceedings. So when you see that, then you're free of being caught up in definitions, which doesn't mean you need to suppress definitions, and your mind is still free to carry on defining things with wild abandon, like we always do, but you will no longer feel entrapped by that. You will no longer feel caught in your own definitions. It'll just be an epiphenomena of the way you function. So it's not a matter of eliminating the phenomena, but when you see the context that the phenomena exists in, then you aren't stuck in it anymore. You aren't under its sway, you aren't a prisoner to it. You aren't subject to it, you could say.
At least for the moment, right?
Well, if you see it conclusively, then you're unstuck conclusively. If you see it for a moment, but then you somehow forget that you saw it, then I suppose you then be under the sway.
So it's kind of like you either see it conclusively or you don't, or you're.
No, you can see it clearly, but then have some other subtle point of confusion that can polish up the works, and then you're in the fog again. I mean, most typically, people's process of spiritual inquiry looks just like that, where there will typically be an ongoing series of moments of insight, and then subsequently there'll be, you know, at some point down the way, what happened? You know, where did that insight go? I gotta get it back. I gotta get there. And so, you know, this is very, you know, we're all familiar with this. This is a very common experience. That frequently inquiry can look like this sort of reciprocating engine of insight and then somehow losing it, insight and then somehow losing it. But ultimately, as insight is cumulative, and when you get a profound enough and clear enough insight, and you've done the math thoroughly enough, you see it essentially conclusively. When you see for a fact that experience is unresolvable, it is uninterpretable with accuracy. It's a self-verifying, undeniable certainty that that is the case, and it's actually clearly discoverable that that is the case. And if you get to that point where you see that, then that's you can't put the genie back in the bottle anymore. So at that point, all interpretations are just partial hypotheses that the mind spins out, and you begin to see the mind's work as spinning hypothetical possibilities rather than as seeing accurate versions of the way things are. So the veracity, the way in which you have a tendency to be seduced by your own mental, maps, just goes way down.
It doesn't go all together though, does it?
Well, the phenomena of experiencing that doesn't, but there's no entrapment.
Oh.
Like, for example, my mind is continually, I have thoughts and I think about things and I see things and I have fantasies and the whole deal, just like anyone does. But I clearly see them all as mental events that are fundamentally disconnected from other events and don't necessarily have anything to do with anything. Basically you come to see that you're crazy. You come to see the mind is nuts. And once you get that you're crazy, then, oh, no wonder I'm thinking all this bullshit. I'm a crazy person. And you don't forget that you're crazy. You don't stop being crazy necessarily. The mind keeps spinning out garbage. but you're a crazy person, so of course I'm thinking like that. I'm a crazy person. And it no longer gets in your way.
But it also seems like there's an overriding sense of singularity.
Yeah, well, because the context is, that's what I mean.
Anything apart.
The context in which you're a crazy person is this massive, inclusive wholeness that you are. So the fact that there's this mental insanity going on is sort of a small sub-event in something vast that is not like that at all, that you are, that is always here, is always a given. So in other words, for a person that is, let's say deluded in a spiritual sense, that is subject to believing their mental thoughts and their mental interpretations, that it looms big. That's very important. It's very large, and their world is largely constructed of that. But for a person that sees the context of mental events, mentality is very small. It's a very small subsystem happening in this vast field of presence, most of which is not mentality, most of which is not conceptuality. And so the scales turn. In the case of this deluded obsession with our interpretations, they're front and center. It's everything we see our whole lives, and we see everything through that, and it's all very important and very urgent and applies to everything.
And believable.
Well, of course, that's what makes it all so gripping.
So at the time when the delusion is in play, so there are moments when you catch the fact that this is a delusion in play.
Yes.
But then it seems to be pretty brief, and it doesn't offer a respite from a succession of whatever, like, oh, I should be having this delusion, no, I should not be, it's okay, it's not. So the whole chain of reactions, it doesn't seem to be a freedom from that.
Right. But this is why I'm saying you have to see the basis of thought in itself is intrinsically flawed. By seeing that actual experience is uninterpretable. And all thought is based on the erroneous supposition that reality is interpretable. If reality is interpretable, then what I'm thinking about is really like the way I'm thinking about it. If this really is a chair, then I can start thinking about chairs, and I'm really thinking about this. But if I can say, what this really is completely uninterpretable and cannot be accurately captured by the concept chair, then whatever I'm thinking about chairs, it has no steam. It doesn't tie into reality because it's not referring to this actuality. So the mentality basically becomes detached from actuality and hence unimportant. But when you think your thoughts actually accurately refer to the world, then all of a sudden they seem very important and urgent, and you're caught up in them, and so on and so forth.
So you're saying basically thought, and it's not just thought, right? I mean, along with that, there's all this whole package of feelings and emotions, everything kind of bundled in.
Yes.
And so you're saying all of that, you just notice it within the space, and you're saying that so they're all equally false. Is that?
Well, you notice the relationship between thought and the field of experience, and you discover that thought does not accurately capture or reflect the field of experience.
Of what's happening right now.
Yeah, of course. The pretension of thought is that it's accurate. You know, thought, the arrogance of thought is that it's really about reality. It's about what's really going on. But that is not true, because the nature of what reality is too nonlinear and too infinite and too unresolvable, undefinable to be accurately defined by thought. So the words that pretend to refer to things accurately don't do so. So they don't actually indicate the thing. When you see that across the board, your thoughts are disempowered. So at that point, it's no longer has such urgency, has such importance. And emotions generally, by and large, in terms of the way we usually use that word, are reactions to thought.
Yeah.
We tell ourselves a story, and then we have an emotion as if that story was true. It's like you go and see a sad movie, and then you feel sad because it's an emotional reaction to the idea that the events of the movie are true and actually happened, and that would feel sad. And so in our minds, we tell ourselves these stories, and then we react as if the story was true, and then there's an emotion. But no story is true. No story is true, because you can't. It's like I can tell you about my father. I could tell you where he was born and where he lived or what he did. I would not be, but the story, the actual life of my father would be completely and utterly beyond the story. The story could not get detailed enough to include what my father really was. And the same with anything I could possibly think about my father. I can't think thoughts that can completely comprehensively capture the story of what he really was, because he's beyond that. He has too much richness, too much diversity and characteristics to be captured in thought. Thought is too simplistic. And when you see this, and this is true of any and all thoughts in relationship to actualities, to actual experiences. And when you see that experience is too complex and rich and nonlinear to be captured by thought, then the tendency to believe one's thoughts and the tendency to get caught up in that as having importance, and therefore the tendency to be emotionally reactive to that as if it was true, just diminishes, because you see, oh, these thoughts of mine are an oversimplification. They're not actually true. There's more going on than my description of it can include. So the description is maybe partially true, but it's also partially untrue, because it's excluding so much information. Intrinsically, it has to, because actual event is so rich and ideas are so narrow. And when you see that, then thought is disempowered.
And when thought is disempowered, I'm presuming that you said you give it less credence, so does it kind of get a little quieter, subside a little bit?
It may, but it also gets smaller.
Kind of same thing, isn't it?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I'm noticing. Pretty cool.
But the important thing is always being with your direct experience outside of interpretation, and all the corresponding way that impacts on your thought and all that happens automatically. So it's not like you need to make sense of that.
Tell me what you mean.
Just feeling this is here, just the way it is, And there's no way I could possibly describe it.
And what happens automatically?
Everything. Just do that and everything else follows. Forget about thought, forget about this and that, forget about that. We're talking about these things and it happens to be somewhat relevant, but it's not, but it's irrelevant in the sense that it does not, you don't need, these questions don't need to be asked because they take care of themselves. The only thing that matters is being intelligently, engagedly present with your experience outside of interpretation, to any degree whatsoever. And doing that from time to time, when it's easy, and cumulatively, everything else will follow on that.
Thoughts also will self-liberate too if you do that.
Yeah, of course. It takes care of itself.
They do.
You know, I call it, like I'll try to work on something and nothing works, and all of a sudden I just let go of it, and then I get a glimpse. It's almost like a picture taken. The minute I see it, it's just a glimpse. Everything falls apart. It's just bam. It's gone. Yeah, just that one glimpse will do it. And I'm not making it happen. Yeah.
You don't need to worry about how it happens and how to do it, just do it anyway. Have it happen anyway. And then that's the bang for the buck right there.
You said do it anyway?
Yeah. What time is it getting to be?
4:30.
4:30. Should we knock off? It's been a long day.
Yeah.
Why don't we knock off? Have a nice night. And tomorrow's a new day.
Tomorrow's a new day.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Peter.